On March 6th, 1964, a 22-year-old boxer stood in front of a room full of reporters and said something that would follow him for the rest of his life. He said this: "My name is Muhammad Ali." Now, 2 nights before that, he had stepped into the ring and he had shocked the world. He stepped into the ring against a man named Sonny Liston. Sonny was one of the most feared heavyweight champions of his day. And this 22-year-old stepped into the ring and beat him. And so at 22 years old, he was the heavyweight champion of the world. And he stood in front of the cameras with something to say. The name that's on my birth certificate was Cassius Clay. But that's not who I am anymore. And from that day forward, he would be known as Muhammad Ali. Now, not everybody accepted it right away. Some reporters kept on calling him Cassius Clay, but Ali wasn't confused about who he was. He was making a statement, right? And the statement is, something has changed. And he knew it. Now, if you know the history, there's a lot more to it than that. And, whenever you think of Muhammad Ali, the point is, there's something powerful about the idea of a changed identity, right? There's something powerful about the idea of a changed identity. And that is exactly what we're going to see today. But we're going to see it today in a man named Jacob. Let's kind of catch up with Jacob a little bit. We met him last week. He is the grandson of Abraham. He is the son of Isaac. He is the next link in the people that God has chosen to carry on his promises. We saw last week that he's a twin. And his twin brother was named Esau. And man, their relationship was a wreck from the get-go, wasn't it? I mean, their relationship was... Why? Because Jacob was a schemer. Why? Because Jacob took advantage of his brother. He deceived his own dad to get what he wanted. And eventually, he's on the run from all of the fallout of the things that he had created. But even as he ran, God did not let go of him. And so we saw in Genesis chapter 28, God met Jacob in a dream. He renewed the covenant promise that he had made to this family. He renewed it in Jacob. And so here we have this guy who's very far from being a good man. But God is still working in him, and God is still working with him anyway. So from last week to this week, 20 years pass. 20 years pass between what we talked about last week and what we're going to talk about today. And Jacob spent most of that time with his uncle Laban. Now, Laban was a bit of a scoundrel himself, if you read those sections. Why do I say he's a scoundrel? Because Jacob wanted to marry Laban's youngest daughter, Rachel, and we find out that Laban tricked Jacob into marrying both daughters. And so by the time he leaves Laban's house, Jacob's a very wealthy man as far as the amount of animals that he has, the possessions that he has. He has 2 wives. He also has 2 concubines. And those women have had him 11 sons. He has flocks that he can't even count. They're so huge. And then God says to him, "It's time for you to go home." Now, what does that mean for Jacob? It means he has to face someone. Who does he have to face? He has to face Esau. So today we are in Genesis chapter 32, and it's Jacob. He's heading home. He's somewhere, between his uncle's house and the promised land, but he's about to have the most important night of his entire life. Word reaches him, right? As he approaches Esau's territory, word reaches him that your brother is coming out to meet you. And he's bringing with him 400 men. What do y'all think's going to happen? Like, what does that sound like? Right? He has no idea what Esau's coming to do, but he remembers the situation when he left. Right? He remembers the situation that made him have to leave. And so he remembers how he deserves whatever is coming to him. So he does what Jacob has always done. He starts managing the situation, right? So he starts managing the situation. He splits his camp into two camps. The reason being is if one of the groups is attacked, the other might survive. He starts sending gifts ahead of him. Why did he do that? Right? So he starts sending like goats ahead and sheep ahead and camels and donkeys, and he's trying to buy his way back into his brother's good graces. So he's sending waves of gifts ahead of him. And then finally he gets to the point where he sends everybody across the Jabbok River, and he stays back. He stays behind alone. And so here is Jacob, and he's there. He's left alone. Alone in the dark, alone with Esau closing in. And this is where God shows up. It says in Genesis chapter 32, verse 24. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. What? No introduction, no explanation, just some guy is wrestling with Jacob throughout the entire night. Now, spoiler alert, right? This isn't some ordinary man. Who is this? Anybody know who this is? This is God. It's God himself. All night long, wrestling with Jacob. His whole life, Jacob had fought for. His whole life, Jacob has fought for blessing. He has schemed for it. He has manipulated people for it. He has grabbed at God's promises with his own strength, with his own plans. But we get here, and this night he's about to learn something different. He's about to learn that the greatest victory isn't found in fighting harder. The greatest victory is found in refusing to let go, even when you don't have anything left. When the man realizes that Jacob isn't going to give up, he simply touches the socket of Jacob's hip and he dislocates it, right? Just like with one touch. That's all it takes. And it wasn't that God couldn't beat Jacob in a fight. That's not what we're reading here. It's not that God could not beat Jacob in a fight. God is actually allowing the struggle, right? God's allowing the struggle to go on. Why? Because Jacob needs to find something here. Jacob needs to find something in this struggle. And so God touches his hip and he dislocates it. And now Jacob is wounded and he's exhausted. Not only that, he's hours away from facing his brother who's bringing 400 armed men. And this is where you would expect the grip to finally break. Because Jacob is beaten. And he is in pain. And he has every reason in the world to just let go. And he doesn't. And this is the moment when the whole story turns, not in the hours of wrestling, but in what Jacob does the instant he is defeated. Because a person can hold on when you think you might win. It's a totally different thing when you believe all hope is lost. And I was reading, and I was praying about this week, and it kind of struck me that this may be the real difference between Jacob and Esau, right? This may be like the defining difference between these two people. Esau was a man who traded his birthright for a bowl of stew. The promise of God given up for whatever felt good in the moment, whatever he needed in the moment. And he never fought for the blessing because he never valued it enough to fight for it. Jacob was the opposite. He spent his entire life taking God's blessing so seriously that he was willing to lie and deceive and manipulate to get it. Yes, that is flawed. Yes, that's a messed up way of looking at it. But he refused to treat the blessing of God as something disposable, right? And so here he is, and now he's wounded. He's on the ground. Nothing left to offer, nothing left to scheme. But that same refusal to let go shows up one more time, except this time it isn't aimed at outsmarting anybody. What is it aimed at? Holding on to God. Holding on to God himself. And when we think about faith, sometimes faith looks less like confidence and more like clinging on when we don't understand. Sometimes it looks less like confidence and more like, God, I can't fix this. I don't know what you're doing. But I'm not letting go of you. Verse 26, then the man said, let go of me, for it's daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let go of you unless you bless me. And this may be the real turning point here in the story, right? Not the wrestling, but the asking. And so for the first time, Jacob isn't trying to take the blessing. He's asking God to give him blessing. The surrender here is not about giving up on God. The surrender here is him giving up control to God. He had spent his entire life trying to manage the outcomes, manipulate the circumstances. And now, wounded, exhausted, nothing left to rely on. He can't run, he can't scheme, he can't fight. All he can do is hold on to God. And then comes the question that seems almost too simple. Verse 27. The man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. What? I mean, doesn't Why does God ask a question like that? I mean, doesn't he know his name? Well, maybe Jacob needed to say it. Right? Because what's associated with his name? We talked about this last week, right? The name carried the idea of being a grabber, being a heel grabber, being a deceiver. And he lived by the name Jacob all of his life, right? And then it says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Overcome. What exactly did he overcome? He didn't defeat God. He didn't overpower God. He really did not force God to give him anything. What he did was he finally stopped running. He finally stopped managing. He stopped trying to secure everything through his own strength and his own cleverness. And when he had nothing left, he held on to God. And man, that's the strange math, if you will, right? That's the strange math of faith. Because sometimes you win by letting go of everything. Sometimes you win by letting go of everything except God. And it says he called that place Peniel, saying, it's because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. See, he had the proper estimation of what was going on there, right? Like he knew what was at stake there. And so he went into the darkness trying to manage everything, and he came out with a brand new identity. And so you look at this and you say, well, what is this all really about? What's the story really about, right? Is it about wrestling techniques? Is that what it's about? Is it about somehow out-muscling God? Or is it a story about what happens when someone finally runs out of their own answers? See, I think that's what it is. It's talking about what happens when someone finally runs out of their own answers. Because for 20 years, Jacob had been managing everything. His brother, his father-in-law, his reputation, his image. And that night, all of the managing stopped. And God met him in what was left. And maybe that's why we struggle with God the way that we do. Maybe that's why we struggle with God. Because what do we want him to do? We want him to change our circumstances without messing with our other stuff too much. What do we want? We want Esau to just go away. But God is more interested in dealing with Jacob. Sometimes before God can change what is going on around us, he has to change what is inside of us. You get that? That's what he needs to do. That's what he's concerned about. And so where this points to Jesus is that, Scripture is full of people whose encounter with God came with a new name attached. Can you think of any? Right? Simon becomes, right? Saul the persecutor becomes Paul the missionary, right? There's even this interesting section in Revelation 2:17 where it promises that those who overcome all of these things that's going to be talked about in the Revelation, those who overcome these things are going to be given a brand new name only known by the person who receives it. We're going to be given a brand new name. And so there's something about meeting God that reshapes you. And brothers and sisters, that is what is supposed to happen. When we come to Jesus, we are supposed to be changed. We are given a brand new identity. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here. And that's the gospel. And it's bigger than just a fresh coat of paint over the old you. It is an entirely new identity. So here's Jacob, and he came to Jabbok carrying an identity that he had built over a lifetime, and he left that place with a brand new name. In the same way, we come to Jesus carrying our own history, our own failures, our own shame, every name that the world has pinned on us. And we surrender ourselves to him, and we're baptized, and we come up out of the waters, what? A new creation. Romans 6 says we are buried with Christ through baptism, so that just as he was raised, we might walk in a new life. You know, I brought up Muhammad Ali earlier. For years, reporters refused to call him by his new name. Eventually, the world had no choice but to accept it because the change was permanent. Sometimes the hardest person to convince that we have changed is actually ourselves. You know, I look out and I see people and I'm like, you know, y'all have already, a lot of you, if you've been Christians for a long time, a lot of you have already been baptized. You've already trusted Jesus and been given a new name by God. But the question is, are you still introducing yourself by the old name? I'm the one who always messes up. I'm the one who can't get it together. I'm the one that's too far gone. God calls you Israel, and you are still answering to Jacob. Jacob walked away from that river. Israel walked away from that river with a limp that he would carry for life, but with a name that would define the rest of his story. He had seen God face to face and lived. And everything that flows from that is defined by that night. Very next chapter, he finally comes face to face with Esau, the brother that he had spent 20 years running from. Remember, he's bringing out all these people with him, right? If you know the story, guess what? It's not an army to attack. What is it? It's a welcoming committee. He embraces his brother. He welcomes his brother. Still a scary thing. I can't help but wonder if Israel was able to face Esau the next day only because he had faced God the night before, right? And maybe that's where some of you are today. Not carrying the name on your birth certificate, but the one you say to yourself in your moments of defeat and failure. Hear what God said to Jacob. He says to him in this section, basically this: your struggle does not disqualify you. Sometimes that's where God meets you. So maybe today is the time you stop managing and you stop running and you get honest with God. And then you hold on. And you don't let go. Because the God who met Jacob at the Jabbok is still meeting people today. If you've never trusted and been baptized into him, we'd love to walk with you into that water, because that's where the old life is buried and the new one begins. But if you're here today and if you're already an immersed believer, maybe you just need to hear that message again. Stop answering to a name God has already freed you from. You may still carry a limp. You may still carry a story. But you have a new identity. And when the world says you're still Jacob, you say, no. God has given me a new name. And when your mind says you're not enough, you say, I belong to Jesus. Because when God shows up, he doesn't just rearrange your circumstances, he changes who you are. And Jacob did not win that night because he defeated God. He won because he refused to let go of God. And if you'll let him, God will change who you are. And he will give you a brand new life. We're going to go ahead and sing a song this morning as a song of invitation. If you want to make that decision today, you come forward as we all stand up together and as we sing.